INC Radio. Anywhere in the world, though, we are always together, connected to everyone. Life will be better. Tayo na, sama-sama halina sa INC Radio International na. Itong palaging konektado ka sa INC Radio na.
This is INC Radio, DCEM 954, the voice of truth, the official radio station of the Church of Christ or Iglesianicristo.
You're listening and watching to INC Radio. It's good evening here in the Philippines, and good morning there in Washington, D.C. Good morning, Sister Eliza and Sister Kathleen. Kamusta po?
Hi, mabuti po. Good morning, Brother Jeff,
Okay, glad
and
to...
everyone tuning in, of course.
Yes po. And we're glad to see you all po. And we'll be turning over po to you there in INC Radio, Washington, D.C. for the next 28 minutes.
Onward to further victory, that's the plan. There's no stopping us now. There's no stopping us now. No one can.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I am Sister Kathy Ramirez, and my co-host today is Sister Elisa Mojica. Welcome to INC Radio Washington, D.C. Satellite Studio. Today is April 13, 2024, and it's 9 a.m. We are talking about blooms and grows today. It's about gardening, and even if you know everything there is to know about gardening, you're going to want to tune in because we have a special guest today, Brother Jim Sewell, who has a wealth of information about this topic, and you're not going to want to miss it. Sister Elisa, good morning.
Good morning, Sister Kathy, and those tuning in. Yes, so it is spring. So, we're getting ready to see all these flowers and plants blooming, all these colors. So, we have the perfect guest with us today, as was mentioned by Sister Kathy. We have Brother Jim Sewell. Hello, brother. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, sis. Good morning. First, I just want to thank you all for having me on the show today. I love to talk about gardening. So any opportunity I get, I'm going to jump all over it. But I'm
Mhm.
Brother Jim Sewell. I'm from the locale of Pensacola, Florida. So you see that. And of course, you can watch me a little bit later on today with the rest of my hosts from INC Radio, Florida today.
Yes, look at him promoting. So everyone, please tune in later today. And so Florida, what's that weather like? So, you know, what made you enjoy landscaping and gardening? And does that have to do with the weather you have right now?
Sure. I started out, because I grew up on a farm. I was very blessed to grow up on a farm. My dad had been a farmer, and so it was kind of a natural fit that I kind of got into gardening. We grew a lot of our own food. It was something that I always love. I love that idea of being self-sufficient,
Mhm.
and I was really blessed that my dad kind of took me under his wing, showed me how to grow a lot of things, and even though I've got a small plot now, I
Yeah.
still managed to grow a lot for our family.
Yeah, that's pretty cool that you grew up in a farm. And I feel like it'd be a cool idea for everyone to have a farm, but I feel like we all want to start small. So you have any tips and tricks in planting? Like, for example, oh, I want to start planting, but what's the best seed that I can buy? What's the easiest plant to plant as a beginner? Like, is it a flower? Is it a vegetable?
Sure. Well, I tell you what, the big things about gardening, and I was trying to share my slideshow here, but I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty. But I'll just go ahead and just run through it. You see, gardening is pretty simple. You know, obviously mankind's been gardening for centuries. We wouldn't be here. We all love to grow things. So the basics are really about the soil, the location, the plant varieties, and then care.
Mhm.
And you know what I really want to share with you all today are some of my tips for those specific things. And truly, to start out with, to cover those basics, it really is about, you know, you want to find a good location to put a garden. A garden location needs to have about 5 to 6 hours of sunlight each day. Ideally, you want to have that location kind of in a southern exposure.
Mhm.
So, you know, like I have a backyard, my backyard is fenced in. It's impossible for me to grow anything on the north side of my wall because it's simply going to be in the shade most of the day. But
Mhm.
on the far side of that, you know, I'm going to grow all kinds of things. So you need sunlight, but you don't have to have sunlight all day long. As a matter of fact, in some places, it's probably, you know, depending on the variety of plant, you don't want too much sunlight
Mhm.
because it'll actually get too hot. The soils and everything, people make a, you know, a big deal out of soil, and it's really fairly simple. You know, you all in around Washington, DC, I'm assuming there's some pretty good soil around in those low countries, so you can definitely use your local soil. You know, you can go out and find some cheap soil. You know, a lot of times I'll kind of mix. When you go out to the store to buy the bags of soil, if you have a raised bed or a pot, a lot of times you can use local, you know, what you can find for yourself
Mhm.
cheap. You can put that in the bottom of the pot. You really, but it's always recommended to have like the top 4 or 5 inches can be that garden soil. And the reason is you don't have to fight all the weed seeds. And everybody wants to have, you know, an easy time with the gardening.
Yes. So
When it
speaking
comes,
of soils, how do you know if it's a healthy soil? Like, what if someone just suddenly wants to plant and like, can I pick some up from my backyard or something?
yeah, and that's you know what you're wanting to look at some dark loamy soil. And when I say that, you know, soil that is almost black, and when you run it through your hands, you know, clay is not bad,
Mhm.
but clay can make things tough. Good soil, if you run your hands through it and squeeze it, it should form a ball, but then kind of fall apart a little
Mhm.
bit. If it's too tight, it's probably has too much clay in it, and it's going to make it harder to work the soil. If it's too loose, like we have here in Florida, it's probably got too much sand in it. So, you know, the basics of it, you just want a good soil structure. And like I said, that when you see that black in that soil, you know that there's a lot of good organic matter in it. And that's why when you buy soil from, you know, different stores, you're going to see it's like usually a black color. That's because there's a lot of organic you know, materials in it as well.
Oh wow. And we would love to know more about your planting and your skills, but we'll make sure to tune in, continue tuning into to our audience and type up your questions. So we'll be right back after these messages. And our message will be, let us see. I wonder what it is.
Well, in case we don't get
You
those,
are listening to
there they
Iglesia
go.
Ni Cristo Radio, the voice of truth.
Kilalanin ang mga bagong mukha ngayong April 22, 2023, 2 p.m. live on INCRadio YouTube channel. Abangan sa masayang tahanan.
And I think we're back. You are on INC Radio, Washington, D.C. satellite studio. Thanks for joining us today. And we are talking about blooms and grows. We are getting back into our main topic today. And we have Brother Jim Sewell. Thank you for correcting me. It's not Sewell, but Sewell. He's joining us out of Pensacola, Florida. Their soil is a lot different from ours here in Maryland. In Maryland, it's very clay like. And so we have a lot of trouble with root rot. because if your soil is thick like clay, then it's not properly draining, and our plants' roots are subject to just rotting in that water that hasn't drained out. So, Brother Jim, what are the basics of soil? You were getting into it. Yours is quite sandy, so it's loose. How do you make that more loamy, like you've just described?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and I think I have the presentation going.
All right.
And really what you want to do, if you have some clay soil, and it happens, I have a lot of experience with that. When I was in Tennessee prior to moving down to Florida, it was such clay soil. Now, clay soil happens to have a lot of nutrients in it. And the trick is, just like you said, has a tendency to retain water, and it's kind of hard to work. So what you want to do is really try to work in as much organic matter as possible. And of course, this is a picture of, everybody likes to look at compost in the morning, right? But this is a picture of my compost bin. And that's a great way to mix in a lot of different organic matter. This compost bin, how I do compost, a lot of people get intimidated with the idea of compost, but it's pretty simple. We eat at home a lot. We like to take our garden scraps and put them back into the garden. And so what I usually do, it'll be a bucket of kitchen scraps to a bucket of some type of carbon matter. And that carbon matter is usually, it can be something like dried leaves, or it can be, you don't really want to use grass clippings because they tend to be a little too wet. But a lot of times I'll just use peat moss, and peat moss is kind of idiot proof, right? You can just take a bucket of peat moss to a bucket of your garden, your kitchen waste, mix it together. And this is in a barrel, and it's going to break down pretty quickly, and it's going to give you some nice soil, so that, especially for you in that clay soil.
What is the what are those things that look like potatoes in there?
Those are eggshells. And
Eggshell.
that's another thing. There is a lot when you're dealing with home gardening. You have all these huge advantages, like you're going to be eating organic. You're also going to be eating a lot of minerals. So many of the lettuce, the different vegetables we get in the grocery store now, they lack a lot of the minerals. And you think about eggs, it's calcium. So when they break down, when you eat organically from things that, from like the compost that you make, you're gaining all those added vitamins and nutrients that, people are running out and spending all kinds of money buying supplements. And sadly, a lot of that is because our soil just isn't as nutrient dense as it used to be on these big commercial farms.
So you were explaining the measurements. So you do have to keep a close watch on how much of this, as to dry matter, wet matter, and dry matter. What are no-nos? What should you not include in your compost bin?
Well, I mentioned before, some people like to try to use grass clippings, but they tend to be too wet. And what's going to happen is, soil is alive and compost is alive. And there's all kinds of bacteria that are very beneficial, that and microbes, and you want to keep them living. And basically what happens is, if you put too much wet matter into a compost bin,
Okay.
it really will drown out those bacteria who they're actually doing the job of breaking it down, turning this into soil. You can see in this picture, it already looks kind of black in
Mhm.
there. But there's a lot of fresh materials in there but within a matter of a couple of days, because I have a healthy compost bin, everything starts getting broken down. And you want to balance, actually. If your compost bin is smelling, it's because you probably don't have enough carbon matter in it. That's
Okay.
why I said something like peat moss, or uh, I would, maybe even sawdust. You can use a lot of different things, but like I said, you want to keep that balance. It should be a little damp, but it shouldn't be,
Wet.
drenched. Yeah.
Right. Where do you get the peat moss?
You can find it at most, like big box stores. They'll have peat moss. So a lot of the home improvement stores, they're going to have peat moss. It comes in a giant cube. It's a little unwieldy, but I buy one of those, and it'll last me for usually an entire year. I just buy one a year, and it breaks up pretty easily. And I just mix a little bit of that into, like I said, usually a 1-to-1. It changes throughout the year. Like in the wintertime, I'll tend to not put quite as much. But it's really composting makes it fun.
Yeah,
Everything about
Brother Jim, I'm so sorry. We have a couple of comments coming in. Everyone's so excited. Sister Elisa, do you want to read those for us?
Yes, so here we have from Brother Sidney Santos. He was asking, how do we keep our deer away from our garden? And
garden.
also, let's see. And we also have a greeting from Brother Mario. He said, "Good evening here in the Philippines and stay safe, brethren. Greetings from the locale of Brixtonville, district of Caloocan North." Let me
There
see.
was
Yes,
I
sister.
had responded, Brother Jim, I had responded to Brother Sydney. I said, we've used deer repellent spray in the past, but it doesn't smell good at all. So another option is to plant mint, sage, or even marigolds, and that keeps the deer away. What do you think?
Well, I grew up out in the country. I can say there's nothing better than a bow and arrow to keep deer away.
No.
But and a lot of times, deer will usually be frightened away by like dogs too. Like if you have a little dog or something like it, if they know
What if
there's
you're allergic to dogs?
but, but
You're sorry out of luck. No, we have a dog, but we keep him in the crate at night. So the
oh yeah,
deer are not afraid of him. Once we put in not petunias, but pansies. We had rows and rows of pansies, and the very next day, everything was bald. The deer
oh
had a salad bar.
that deer love. Pansies. You can eat pansies. I don't know if you tried eating the petals
I
on the
haven't.
pansies, but they're actually delicious. And deer know what they're doing, so they're sweet. So they're really edible. That's one of the things, especially in the winter. Like early in the spring, you can grow. There's nothing better to put in a salad than some pansy petals. And
Wow.
like I said, they're beautiful.
Their
Really.
leaves, the leaves or their petals?
The petals, the actual
Okay.
petals. So you get these pretty, all the different colors and stuff in a salad, but they're delicious. They're kind of sweet.
I'm
Uh,
looking at the time and we want to move on. What are you showing us on your screen, brother? We see a couple of are these vegetables?
well, one of the things I wanted to talk about is, if you're new to gardening, one of the easiest things to start growing are herbs. And I have some of my herbs here in the front. I just have them in pots. You can see they're just like leftover pots from like trees and things that I planted. But herbs are pretty hardy. They're hard, they're hard to kill. But I've got some dill growing. I've got some rosemary. I got some chives and I got some mint. But if you really want to, it's kind of the gateway to getting into gardening is truly herbs, because you can grow a lot. These pots aren't very big, but they keep us in all the herbs that we need, and we use a lot of herbs in our cooking. That's another thing. I everything about gardening is about eating to me. So so it's definitely.
How
Uh,
far how far down can you cut your herbs though? Like down to the stem, the stalk?
they're all a little bit different. On the dill, they tend to grow outward from the base. So
Okay.
when I'm trimming from the outside. You can see those stalks. I'll trim all the way down to the base, right?
Okay.
Uh, on the far side is rosemary. Rosemary, what you want to do is try to trim the new growth. If it gets woody, you don't want to cut into that wood. But if you trim right to that woody growth, and you get the new growth off, what will actually happen? It'll split, and you'll get double the rosemary over
Oh,
time.
nice.
It'll just keep on growing. So it populates well. Mint's in a pot, because if you don't have it in a pot, it'll take over your garden. You can be as brutal to that as you want to. It's really hard to kill. My wife loves to put fresh mint in her tea every morning, so that's why we always have that. So we're picking at it. That mint plant has been alive for 5 years. Just so you know. So it's a great way. And of course the chives are really trimming them off from the very bottom.
The chives grow wild here in Maryland, in Gaithersburg. Have you seen this, Sister Elisa? they come up from our lawns.
Oh yes, us too.
Yeah. Have you ever
I
tried to eat it?
I pulled it one time to smell the stem. It literally, like, the smell is really strong.
Like green onion, but
Yeah.
stronger.
Yeah,
Yep.
I remember those days when I lived in Ohio. You could go out and get, and there's a lot of things you can actually, dandelion greens. I mentioned the pansies, the wild onion.
What about the
Dandelion greens are
dandelion?
great in salads. You can go out, and instead of looking at dandelion greens and being mad at your dandelion greens, you can actually they're edible. Of course, obviously, if you have a lawn, if you're using a lot of pesticides or herbicides or something like that, you don't want to be ever eating out of your lawn. But if you
Wait, are
don't
we
really put
talking about,
anything
like,
on
the
your
same
lawn,
dandelion I'm thinking of? Like, the
Yeah,
the ones
the
that
weeds.
glow?
Yeah,
yeah. Well,
those, right?
yeah. It's funny, there's a lot of things you can actually eat, especially in the wintertime, in places like where you are. When I lived in Ohio, my grandma could go out into the front yard and gather up things and make a salad out of it. But you got to be careful. I mean, it's something you definitely got to know what you're doing, but with a little research and, because I will say my mom tried the same thing after my grandma had left to stay with some of our other family, and we ate the salad. It was delicious, but we all got hives. So there's something to be said for knowing what
You
you're eating.
got you got hives,
Hives.
HIVES, right?
Right. So one of the things I also want to share with you all. This is a picture that it happens to be that those leafy area. That's arugula, and that's one of my favorite things to grow. It's really easy to grow, but you can see how jam packed those plants are. I put a lot of seed into a pot, but this arugula pot will probably last me about 4 months. But what I'm doing is I'm pulling out, I'm harvesting every 3 or 4 days. I'm pulling out some of the arugula plants to thin it so it has more space. That's one of my biggest secrets to productive gardening is really overseeding. I have limited space, so I want to get the most I can out of it. And when you overseed, seeds, they're really cheap, right? So you can put the seeds out and you can start growing all kinds of different things, and you can eat them when they're small. You don't have to wait for something to mature. And a lot of times, like this arugula, young arugula is so sweet, but you still get that hint of peppery flavor, and it's so much better. I'm really, now that I've been doing it this way, I almost never let it mature because I'm always planting some more seeds, and I
My
can start.
mom, my mom, Erlinda Tayenko, I think she's tuning in. She loves arugula. So
Oh,
we're gonna start with this. We're gonna start planting arugula today. What is that pot to the left of your arugula?
oh, that's oh my gosh, I'm lost for it all of a sudden. The Italian herb,
Oregano?
oregano. Thank you. Yeah, that's another pot. That pot has been there for 5 years. It just keeps growing, and in the wintertime it'll turn brown. But you can see here all these pictures. By the way, I just went out in my backyard a couple days ago when I knew I was going to be on the show. They'll start greening up, and it'll actually survive a frost. So it's now all those leaves will eventually be that dark green. And that's another thing. Fresh oregano in cooking, it just makes a world of difference. If you have a recipe that charges for Italian seasoning, you
Right.
put fresh oregano in it, people will just go crazy.
So for the dill, I know you can put that on salmon, rosemary as well. Do you have any other hints, any recipes that you put those in?
I am, you've heard me say it, I'm really about self-reliance, and I'm also about eating as naturally as possible. And, one of the things we do, because we grow a garden, we have fresh salad. My wife and I eat a salad usually every day for lunch. And with that, we like to make our own salad dressing. So we use a lot of dill. We make our own salad dressing out of there. And I'll use, Greek yogurt with some kefir milk and mix it up. I'll put maybe a little bit of ranch seasoning in it, like you can get the packs of seasoning mix. But then I put a lot of dill because I love dill. And I'll just cut it up. And that fresh dill and that salad dressing is so good. Same thing with that oregano. We can take a fresh oregano, put it in some olive oil, some apple cider vinegar, And wow, it's fantastic.
Delicious. Brother Jervy Alviar has a tip for us. I have some tips. If we plant something first, is to pick the right location, 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight, drain well, and it doesn't stay wet, and it's stable and not windy. Also, water accessible. So you don't want to be so far from your water source that you have to keep walking back and forth with a pail of water. I've had that happen before.
Yeah,
So
watering really is a key, and typically I make it a little bit of a routine to go out and water. Living in Florida, it gets so hot in the summer that often I'll end up watering twice a day. Early in the morning is usually the standard best time to water a garden, but you can put in, when you water, uh, you know, try to water in these raised beds. You have to water more frequently. If you have the plants growing in the ground, I highly recommend just, watering and doing a deep water once or twice a week at the most. Because if you have the plants in the ground, if you water every day, the roots will tend to grow shallow because they know that they're going to get that
they
water.
get spoiled.
So if you do a deep watering like twice a week, that's going to train your roots to grow more deeply, so that when it's stressed or when it gets really hot, they're going to be able to survive that heat or that dry weather.
You said deep watering. What do you mean by that? How many minutes?
Deep watering is usually what you'll want to do. Like in most garden, I turn the water on. You know, when you start to see the water puddle a lot on the surface, it's done,
Okay.
right? So I say it like that because there's really no time, because it's so dependent on your soil. Our soil, like I mentioned before, it's very sandy, so it's going to suck in a lot of water. So I usually tend to have to water a little bit longer. In Tennessee, especially early in the season, that it maybe would take only a half an hour, for to let the sprinklers run on it. So it's really dependent. What you don't want to see is big puddles just kind of sitting out on the water
Right.
on the top of your lawn.
We have another comment. Sister Lucy Ancheta said that composting, putting compost is helpful for the plants. Brother Matt Carl Talon says, working on your garden landscape and appreciating your work is good for your health, physically, mentally, and emotionally. I think that's why so many people took to gardening, especially during the pandemic, right? Lucy Ancheta again, flower garden. My coworker Febra inspired me to grow irises, daylilies, and gladiolas. I have those too, because one of my daughters is named Iris, and one of my neighbors are named Lily.
Yeah,
Go
know,
ahead, brother.
it's absolutely, that was a great, as hard as the pandemic was, it did excite people to stay at home more. And I'm so glad, like a lot of my neighbors in my neighborhood, they came to me. I was able to share with them my gardening ideas. People who love the garden, if you walk by somebody's house in your neighborhood and they have some beautiful flowers, stop and talk to them. Believe me, every gardener loves to share what they know. And what's right for one person may not be right for another. And a huge blessing, because my dad showed me how to garden. Here's a picture of my son. So big bottleneck gourds, bottle gourd. And I think
We call it upo.
yeah, that's right, Upo. Anyway, he loves to be a part of the garden, and he'll come out. As when he was big enough to really stand, he was helping me water.
He's a
So
good-looking kid. How old is he?
he's 5 years old, so he's getting to the point now. This year was the first year he actually put seeds in the ground.
Yeah.
So I showed him how to put the seeds in the ground and cover them up, and so he's a big help. But like I said, it's something the whole family can do. My wife did not grow up in around farming or anything, but she's probably out there as much as I am now because she really enjoys it.
We didn't get into annuals or perennials yet regarding like ornamental plants, but we want to make sure we read this greeting from Sister Grace Galarpe. Advanced happy birthday to my grandchild Quinn in Maine. We miss and love you. And we have one more here. My youngest son Phil, that's also Sister Grace. Youngest son Phil loves to plant. He's patient enough to place lamps to provide light or sunlight all throughout winter season. So I don't know if that has to do with a greenhouse, but we've got with 2 minutes left. Oh my goodness, Brother Jim, gotta wrap it up. I just wanted to mention for flowering plants, take into consideration your annuals, which are petunias, coleus, and elephant ears, right? For
Yeah.
perennials, azaleas, and what else? Forsythias in this region.
Right. You know, the big thing, because I am so focused on those edible gardening things, but truly in the past few years, incorporating marigolds into my beds, my garden beds, had been great to prevent pests. You know, what you really want to do when you're gardening, especially in your backyard, you want to think about that whole ecosystem, right? And you want a variety of things, because if you have one particular, if you're mostly just growing one variety of something, and a pest comes along and decides to start eating all of that, you're kind of out of luck. So
You have
having a
no
variety,
firewall.
that's
It's your
right.
firewall.
Those marigolds are there. They're my little defensive lines, you know, and in each of those places. Plus, you also want to have, you know, the great thing about having flowering plants, you mentioned forsythia and some of these other bushes that flower. You know, you want to attract pollinators into your yard. So you definitely want to have bees coming in. And the more flowers that you have, and you get that with ornamental, the more bees that are going to be available to pollinate, you know, your tomato plants and your eggplants and things like that. So it's about thinking about how can I, my favorite neighbors are my bees, right? I want to get as many in my yard as possible.
Awesome. So awesome. Brother Jim, can we have your personal greetings now?
Sure. I just like want to give a shout out to my brethren here, the locale in Pensacola. There's some great gardeners. I tell you, they're fantastic down here. I learn a lot from my brethren here. We share a lot, and of course, shout out to my family and all my friends. And thank you all for joining us today.
Awesome. Sister Elisa.
Yes, so we have our CFO and Unstoppable highlights. So let's check that out.
The Binhi Brethren in the District of Washington, D.C. gathered together to learn and listen to trending topics today revolved around social conformity. The brothers and sisters between the ages of 12 to 17 years old shared their experience of how they've overcome peer pressure as Christian members. The young members in the Church of Christ were reminded that even though we may face these temptations, the words of God continues to guide us in the right direction.
So here are upcoming events in our district. We have this Saturday a Baltimore District Officers General Meeting, and this coming Sunday at 3 to 6 p.m. in Washington, D.C. Chapel, we have Christian Brotherhood International with Christian Employee Association Center Fair and Resume Building. And also this coming Sunday at 5 p.m. at Kenmore Middle School, we have our WDC Badminton Tournament. And for our show next week, don't forget to tune in at 9 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time.
Some journeys have sharper turns, steeper climbs, and impossible odds. Join us on INCRadio Washington, D.C. Satellite Studio on April 20, 2024 at 9 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time as we talk about Faith Amplified, inspired by another's journey.
For their unstoppable support, we'd like to thank our INCRadio Washington, D.C. family for supporting our broadcast, especially our district minister, Brother Sidney Santos, our station manager, Brother Arnel Solano, our SEBC president, Brother Angelo Manalo, and of course, a very special greeting to our executive minister, our beloved Brother Eduardo V. Manalo. Thank you for tuning into INCRadio Washington, D.C. Satellite Studio. Stay unstoppable. We'll see you again next week.
Bye.
Have a great weekend. Thank you, Brother Jim.
Thank
Sure,
you.
my pleasure.
Continue.
Anytime.
This is INC Radio, DCEM 954, the voice of truth, the official radio station of the Church of Christ or Iglesia ni Cristo.